The Galactic Dominion, an interstellar confederation of bureaucratic know-it-alls, prided itself on its meticulous classification system of every known species. They had conquered the galaxy not through war, but through paperwork so convoluted it could collapse a neutron star. Every civilization was labeled, categorized, and neatly stored in their vast archives. Earth? A Category 9, backwater. Ambassador Gribbler, a distinguished seven-limbed scholar with an advanced degree in superior species studies, stood before the Dominion Grand Council with a smug expression, which was impressive considering his species. Lacked mouths. He adjusted his ceremonial robes, his gelatinous forehead pulsing in satisfaction as he prepared his speech. "Esteemed members of the Council," he began, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining calculus to a particularly slow amoeba. "Today, we must once again address the primitive, violent, and altogether irrelevant species known as humans." A collective murmur of disinterest passed through the assembled representatives. Humanity was, after all, old news. The Dominion had reviewed Earth's case centuries ago and determined that humans were unsophisticated, irrational, and far too obsessed with deep-fried food to pose any real galactic threat. Griblor continued, projecting a hologram of Earth spinning, lazily in space. Despite their crude nuclear weapons and their baffling insistence on launching cars into orbit, humans have demonstrated no significant advancement in interstellar diplomacy, warfare, or even basic hygiene. There was polite, scholarly laughter. The council chambers echoed with the self-assured chuckles of alien diplomats who had never known true existential terror. Meanwhile, on Earth, Colonel Jack Chaos Mitchell had just spat his coffee across the Pentagon briefing room. They called. "Us what?" he barked, slamming his fist on the table so hard that the conference room lights flickered. "Category 9, sir," said a terrified lieutenant, sliding a report across the table. Officially classified as irrelevant barbarians." Mitchell's face turned an impressive shade of red. "Barbarians? Do these bureaucratic nerds have any idea what we've done? We put a man on the moon using a glorified tin can, duct tape, and math we did by hand. Not to mention," added Captain Rebecca Carter of the U.S. Space Force, "we turned an intercontinental ballistic missile into a space launch vehicle just because we got bored." Mitchell grabbed the report and flipped through it. Category 9. Just below the species that communicates exclusively through interpretive dance and the one that worships sentient yogurt. Sir," the lieutenant swallowed. "The Dominion is sending a diplomatic delegation to formally inform Earth of its status." Mitchell's expression darkened. He clenched his jaw, then cracked a slow, menacing grin. "All right then. If they want a formal introduction, we'll give them one." Hours later, the Dominion's diplomatic cruiser descended toward Earth, expecting a peaceful greeting. Instead, the skies erupted with a thunderous sonic boom. The delegation barely had time to process what was happening before their ship was tractor-beamed into what appeared to be an Applebee's. The lead diplomat, a bulbous amphibious being named Envoy Triflax, stumbled out of the airlock, his four eyes struggling to adjust to the horrifying neon glow of the Applebee's sign. He turned to his assistant. "Are we under attack?" Before the assistant could answer, the doors burst open. 24 Marines clad in full combat gear and wearing expressions of unholy enthusiasm stormed forward, weapons drawn. "Welcome to Earth!" one of them bellowed. Triflax shrieked. A man stepped forward, clad in a decorated uniform and radiating the energy of someone who had once punched a bear just to establish dominance. "Colonel Jack Mitchell, United States Marine Corps," he introduced himself, extending a hand. Triflax hesitated, then gingerly extended his own three-fingered appendage. Mitchell gripped it and squeezed. Hard. Triflax's knees buckled as he emitted a sound that could only be described as a distressed tuba solo. Mitchell released him and clapped him on the back, hard enough to dislodge some of his internal organs. "So you're the nerds who think we're a bunch of idiots, huh?" Triflax, still gasping for air, managed to croak, We come in peace." "Yeah, we heard," Mitchell said. "But let me ask you something, Fishman. If we're so primitive, how'd we tractor beam your ship into a casual dining establishment?" Triflax blinked, struggling to answer. He turned to his assistant for help, but the assistant was busy hyperventilating into a brown paper bag. Mitchell leaned in. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take us to your fancy Dominion Council, and we're going to have ourselves a little chat about this Category 9 nonsense." Triflax swallowed. "And if we refuse?" Mitchell grinned. "Then you'll get to see what happens when we declare diplomatic relations the Marine Corps way." Triflax didn't know what that meant, but he did know that the glowing red waffle, House Open 24/7 sign behind Mitchell filled him with an existential dread he had never known before. 3 days later, Triflax returned to the Dominion Council chambers, shaking uncontrollably. The Grand Council watched as he took his seat, his eyes darting around as if expecting an ambush. Ambassador Griblor cleared his throat. "Envoy Triflax, your report?" Triflax opened his mouth. No words came out. Just a faint, strangled wheeze. Griblor sighed. "I assume the humans were adequately—" "They have weapons," Triflax blurted. "So many weapons. They carry them for fun." Griblor rolled his eyes. Yes, primitive projectile-based. They strapped a railgun to a pickup truck." Silence. Griblor frowned. I'm sorry. Did you say—" "They live under constant threat of self-extinction, and somehow, this has made them stronger." Griblor's expression faltered. That doesn't make sense. They asked if we wanted to throw hands. I do not know what this means, but I do not wish to find out." The council exchanged uneasy glances. And then, Triflax whispered, his voice trembling, "They took me to a place called Florida." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. One alien fainted. Before Griblor could react, the chamber doors burst open. A booming voice echoed through the hall. "All right, nerds, who wants to talk about Earth now?" Colonel Jack Mitchell stepped inside, aviator sunglasses reflecting the council's horrified faces. Behind him, Captain Carter strolled in casually, sipping from a comically large gas station cup labeled 128 O's Extreme Caffeine. Griblor's stomach sank. He suddenly had a very bad feeling about the future of the galaxy. The Galactic Dominion was burning, not metaphorically, not in a poetic philosophical sense. The Dominion's carefully curated, impossibly vast bureaucratic empire, meticulously organized over millennia, was, quite literally, on fire. And it had taken exactly 1 week since humanity's involvement for everything to start going catastrophically wrong. It had started when the Krogothian Horde, a species of war-obsessed reptilian berserkers, launched their first real offensive. Unlike the Dominion, which prided itself on diplomacy, trade regulations, and ensuring that interstellar zoning laws were obeyed to the letter, the Krogothians believed in one thing: conquest. Their homeworld was a molten deathscape where only the strong survived, and for centuries they had looked at the Dominion's wealth and technology the same way a starving wolf looks at a petting zoo. Now, their warships poured into Dominion. Space, cutting through its defenses like a plasma cutter through cheap alloy. Entire planetary systems fell within days. Dominion fleets, composed mostly of ships designed for ceremonial escorts and light defense, were utterly useless against the Krogothians' brute force tactics. The central bureaucracy, usually so effective at managing diplomatic disputes over interplanetary parking rights, completely collapsed under the pressure of full-scale war. And so, with nowhere else to turn, they made the one decision that had been unthinkable only weeks earlier. They called Earth. It was a delicate matter of course. The Dominion had only just labeled humans as primitive, unhinged barbarians. Reversing that classification so quickly could cause an existential crisis within the Council. So they attempted to word the request carefully, using diplomatic language. that would allow them to save face while also not so subtly begging for help. What they got in return was a single response from Colonel Jack Mitchell, relayed through a Dominion emergency transmission. "Say no more, nerds. We're on our way." And that was the moment everything truly went to hell. Dominion High Command was not prepared for the arrival of Earth's forces. They had expected a measured, cautious approach, perhaps a fleet of Earth's most advanced ships, escorted by seasoned diplomats to negotiate terms of engagement. Instead, they got an armada of repurposed cargo freighters, jury-rigged warships, and what appeared to be a reconfigured amusement park ride, labeled Operation Cosmic Beatdown. At the head of this disaster was Colonel Jack Mitchell himself, standing atop what Dominion analysts later classified as an absurdly oversized, unnecessarily loud, and possibly illegal orbital weapons platform. The first indication that things were not going to proceed normally was when Mitchell ignored the official Dominion docking protocols and instead crash-landed his personal dropship directly onto the steps of the Council's war chamber. The ship's reinforced hull carved a deep trench into the polished marble, skidding to a halt only when it collided with the fountain of galactic peace, obliterating it in a spectacular explosion of water and expensive sculpture fragments. The doors hissed open, and Mitchell stepped out, cigar clenched between his teeth, aviators reflecting the Council's horrified faces. Captain Rebecca Carter followed, her Space Force uniform somehow both perfectly pressed and yet entirely disrespectful in its sheer confidence. Behind them, a squad of heavily armed, disturbingly eager Marines filed out, each one carrying enough firepower to level a small city. Mitchell grinned, cracked his knuckles, and said, "All right, who wants to tell me?" "Where the lizards are?" Ambassador Griblor, who had been quietly contemplating faking his own death to escape further human interactions, cleared his throat and tentatively stepped forward. "Colonel Mitchell," he said carefully, "we appreciate your enthusiasm. However, this is a delicate matter requiring precision and—" Yeah, Mitchell waved him off. "I read your little report. The big angry space lizards are tearing through your systems, and you're getting your tentacled asses handed to you." The Council flinched at the phrasing. Mitchell turned and pointed to a massive holographic display detailing the Dominion's latest losses. He squinted at the strategic map, then scoffed. "All right, first problem. Who the hell designed this defense strategy? This is worse than my ex-wife's parking job." Councillor Brixal, a renowned Dominion military strategist, straightened indignantly. "I'll have you know that our defensive lines have been formulated using centuries of advanced predictive— Yeah, well, I just formulated a new plan using 30 seconds of common sense, and it's already better than yours," Mitchell interrupted. He turned to his Marines. "All right, boys. New mission objective. Krogothian extermination. Full spectrum dominance. Zero hesitation." One of the Marines, a particularly enthusiastic sergeant named Kowalski, raised a hand. "Sir, permission to use wildly unnecessary force?" Mitchell grinned. "Denied." Kowalski's face fell. Mitchell slapped him on the back. "Just kidding. You have full authorization to go completely unhinged. I want maximum overkill on this one." Brixal stared in horror. "You can't just order maximum overkill. War requires—" "Careful." Mitchell grabbed the nearest console, punched in a few commands, and hacked directly into the Dominion's military fleet. Within seconds, Earth's forces were uploading something into the Dominion's battle network. A new strategy? A brilliant tactical maneuver? No. It was a 3-hour compilation of every Florida Man news headline ever written. Within moments, Dominion officers across the galaxy were receiving distressingly chaotic intelligence updates. Florida. Man attempts to rob bank with live alligator. Florida. Man survives skydiving accident after forgetting parachute. Florida man declares war on the moon. Admirals stared at their screens, horrified. What is this?" Brixal whispered. "Psychological warfare," Carter said casually, sipping her enormous gas station soda. "We're letting the enemy see what humanity is truly capable of." Brixall turned back to the screen, where reports were already coming in that Krogothian intelligence units were frantically trying to decipher what any of this meant. Some of their top strategists had suffered mental breakdowns attempting to analyze the erratic, nonsensical nature of Earth's warriors. Within hours, Krogothian Command had issued an emergency declaration. New directive: avoid engagement. With human species at all costs, too unpredictable, possible death-worshipping psychopaths, unknown tactical patterns, or lack thereof. Meanwhile, Mitchell cracked his knuckles and turned to his Marines. All right, boys. Time to introduce these lizards to the greatest military doctrine in history, a Dominion officer swallowed. Are you referring to Sun Tzu's Art of War? Mitchell shook his head. Nope. I'm talking about shock and awe followed by a 100% commitment to absolute chaos. The Dominion Council barely had time to process this before Mitchell turned and barked a single order. Launch Operation Florida Man. And with that, Earth officially entered the war. The galaxy would never be the same. The Krogothian High Command had prepared for war. What they had not prepared for was this. From the moment Earth's forces entered the conflict, everything the Krogothians thought they knew about combat became useless. The Horde had spent centuries refining their military doctrine, disciplined, brutal, and straightforward. They crushed their enemies with overwhelming force, brute strength, and unrelenting aggression. But the humans were something else entirely. The first sign that things were about to go horribly, catastrophically wrong came when Krogothian intelligence intercepted Earth's official military transmission, broadcasted across all available channels. Attention. Hostile Xenos, you done messed up. It was followed by a video of Colonel Jack Mitchell standing in front of a large whiteboard labeled How to Ruin a War, drawing a series of increasingly deranged battle plans while grinning like a madman. The video ended with him throwing the whiteboard out of an airlock. Then the attacks began. The first human fleet to engage the Krogothians was not, as expected, a highly coordinated armada of cutting-edge warships. No, the first strike force consisted of a series of modified space shuttles duct-taped to surplus intercontinental ballistic missiles launched directly at the enemy with no clear plan beyond see what happens. Krogothian Admiral Grack, a seasoned warrior who had personally led the conquest of 17 planetary systems, watched the incoming human fleet on his tactical display and frowned. What? What are they doing? He muttered, watching the erratic flight patterns of Earth's forces. Are they drunk? A nearby officer hesitated. Sir, they appear to be using unconventional flight patterns to avoid our targeting systems. Grack narrowed his eyes at the display. The human ships were weaving, flipping, and was that one of them spinning, moving in ways that should have been impossible? It wasn't until years later that the Dominion finally figured out what had happened. The human pilots had completely ignored the standard principles of space combat and instead flown like they were still in an atmosphere. Instead of proper evasive maneuvers, they had engaged in chaotic, erratic nonsense that rendered Krogothian targeting computers completely useless. And that was before the orbital artillery barrage. Normally, in a civilized war, planetary bombardments were done with carefully controlled precision strikes. The humans had opted for a different approach. Using a fleet of salvaged construction equipment, they had repurposed the remnants of an abandoned moon colony and, with what Dominion scientists later classified as entirely too much enthusiasm, had turned the moon into a shotgun. The first blast vaporized an entire Krogothian fleet. The second wiped out their ground forces. The third was called off only because someone realized they were about to run out of moon. And then, just when the Krogothians thought things couldn't get any worse, the Space Marines deployed. They didn't land by dropship. That would have been logical. Sensible. No, the Space Marines strapped themselves to repurposed amusement park rides, pointed themselves at the surface of the Krogothian war world, and let gravity do the rest. The sight of heavily armed, screaming, Humans descending from the heavens atop roller coaster tracks and decommissioned Ferris wheels broke something deep in the minds of the Krogothian warriors. Many simply dropped their weapons and fled. The others were not so lucky. The first battle lasted less than an hour. The humans lost 3 ships, 17 fighter drones, and a vending machine that had fallen out of an airlock. The Krogothians lost the entire planet. At this point, High Command had a decision to make. The rational response would have been to reassess their strategy. Instead, they did the only thing they knew how to do: escalate. The Krogothian horde launched its largest offensive yet, striking back with every warship, every soldier, every weapon at their disposal. It was a last, desperate push, an overwhelming wave of destruction that no force in the galaxy could stand against. Unfortunately for them, Earth's forces were no longer operating under any known laws of warfare. Dominion High Command had expected a careful, methodical counteroffensive. Instead, they watched in mute horror as humanity unleashed what they called Operation Florida Man. 1,000 unmanned drones, each piloted by a specially programmed AI based on the least stable human minds in recorded history. The Krogothian horde did not stand a chance. Within hours, they were losing ships to rogue drones that kamikazed into their engines while blasting country music at full volume. Their communications were jammed by an unrelenting flood of nonsense. Transmissions, including, at various points, an emergency broadcast of a competitive hot dog eating contest. Several hours of people screaming "Yeet" into the void, and what Dominion analysts later determined to be an audiobook of the art of war, read in its entirety by someone who was definitely not sober. But the true masterpiece of Earth's counter-offensive came when Colonel Jack Mitchell personally led a ground assault on the Krogothian capital world. The plan, such as it was, involved 3 key elements. A full-scale airborne invasion launched from what the Dominion initially thought was a repurposed fast food delivery drone, a single Marine sergeant with an infinite ammo glitch, an entire Waffle House, which was somehow still operational despite being dropped from orbit. The battle began with a distraction. The Marines hijacked every available Krogothian broadcast and streamed a non-stop loop of conspiracy theories, including, "The moon landing was real, but the moon is fake, and is your commander secretly a government lizard?" As enemy forces scrambled to shut it down, the real assault began. Mitchell personally led the charge, kicking down the doors of the Krogothian Supreme Warlord's throne room while dual-wielding plasma rifles. Captain Rebecca Carter crash-landed a captured enemy fighter directly into the palace foyer because, in her words, the door was too slow. What followed was less of a battle and more of a wildly unnecessary explosion-filled spectacle of sheer human madness. The Marines deployed attack squirrels, highly trained, caffeinated rodents launched into enemy formations with tiny, razor-sharp weapons. They set up an entire bar in the middle of the battlefield, just to see if they could. One particularly enterprising soldier rode a Krogothian tank straight through the palace gates while playing heavy metal on external speakers. And then, as the final insult, the Waffle House landed directly on the Supreme Warlord's headquarters. It didn't explode. It didn't collapse. It simply opened for business. And since Waffle Houses are completely indestructible, it remained standing as the ultimate symbol of human defiance. The Supreme Warlord, battered, bruised, and entirely out of ideas, limped. Out of the wreckage, he raised his hands in surrender. "I yield," he gasped. "Just tell me, what the hell is wrong with you people?" Mitchell grinned, clapped him on the back, and said, "Buddy, we've been asking ourselves that for centuries." And with that, the war was over. The war was over, or at least, that's what the Galactic Dominion thought. The Krogothian Supreme Warlord had officially surrendered, an unprecedented event in their species' history. Krogothians did not surrender. They fought until the last. Warrior fell, until their planets were nothing but burning cinders, until there was no enemy left to kill. Surrender was a concept so alien to them that there were no words for it in their language. The closest translation the Dominion could find was shameful defeat by unknown forces of madness. And yet here he was, the most powerful warlord of his people, down on one knee in front of Colonel Jack Mitchell, the leader of the most chaotic military force the galaxy had ever seen. But if the Krogothians thought surrender would bring them mercy, they were about to learn another fundamental truth about humanity. Winning the war is just the beginning. Because, as every historian would later document in horrified detail, the post-war period was when things truly spiraled out of control. The first problem was Earth's idea of terms of surrender. The Galactic Dominion had assumed that the humans would demand reparations, territory, or, at the very least, a significant political restructuring of the Krogothian Empire. Instead, Colonel Mitchell produced a document labeled Post-War Plan, Operation Americanization, and slapped it onto the Supreme Warlord's throne with the same level of casual arrogance as a man slapping a for sale sign on a used pickup truck. The terms were as follows. Krogothians would immediately construct at least one Waffle House on every major planet. At least 10% of their military budget must be allocated to developing their own space force for the memes. A mandatory Florida Man training course must be introduced into all military academies to prevent future strategic incompetence. The Supreme Warlord must, at least once a year, host a barbecue for the entire Krogothian ruling class, during which he is required to wear an apron that says, "Kiss the Cook." All Krogothian warships must now include cup holders and an AUX cable for better vibes in space. Every planet under Krogothian rule must dedicate at least one city to be named New Texas. All Krogothian officers must learn how to shotgun a beer in under 10 seconds. The Supreme Warlord read the list. Then he read it again. Then he burst into tears. "Why?" he roared, his massive reptilian hands clutching his head. "Why would you do this?" Mitchell grinned. "Because we can." The second problem was the Marines. With the war over, Earth's soldiers had nothing to do. And when highly trained, aggressively motivated warriors are left unsupervised in a newly conquered region of space, bad things happen. Entire Krogothian cities were soon overrun with human soldiers who, without a proper war to fight, had decided to introduce cultural enrichment. Within a week, the following had occurred. The first official intergalactic monster truck rally was held on the ruins of what used to be a Krogothian war academy. Several high-ranking Dominion officials had been forcibly introduced to the concept of karaoke, an event that ended with one ambassador attempting to flee the planet after being pressured into singing "Take Me Home, Country Roads." A Waffle House street fight league was established, where any Krogothian noble could challenge a Marine to hand-to-hand combat inside a 24-hour diner. The Marines never lost. The Krogothians' former gladiator arenas, once used for brutal blood sports, were converted into NASCAR tracks after a single human offhandedly remarked, "Y'all ever thought about just racing instead?" Several space stations now permanently displayed neon signs reading, "Earth was here." Perhaps the most catastrophic development was the creation of the first Krogothian Marine Corps. It had started as a joke. It did not remain a joke. A particularly unhinged Earth drill sergeant named Gunny Kowalski had taken it upon himself to train an elite unit of Krogothian warriors in the ways of the U.S. Marine Corps. For the first time in history, Krogothians were being taught the art of absolute, unfiltered chaos. Instead of their usual disciplined, strategic combat formations, they were trained to improvise, to adapt, to overcome. Instead of engaging in honorable duels, they were taught the glorious art of bar fights, surprise attacks, and winning by sheer absurdity. Krogothian war cries, once deep and dignified, were now replaced by unholy screeches of "Aura!" as thousands of reptilian warriors charged into battle with no clear plan beyond cause problems. The Dominion's bureaucrats, watching from afar, were absolutely horrified. "Dear gods," Ambassador Griblaw whispered as he watched footage of a Krogothian tank unit drifting around a battlefield while blasting country music. "We've created something worse than the humans." But the final, most devastating development came when humanity was officially recognized as a galactic superpower. The Dominion Council, After exhausting all possible alternatives, including ignore them and hope they go away, and pretend this was all a bad dream, had no choice but to formally acknowledge Earth's military superiority. In a grand ceremony attended by representatives from every major species, humanity was elevated from Category 9 to Category 1, a distinction previously held only by the most advanced civilizations. Colonel Mitchell accepted the title with his usual lack of grace, leaning into the microphone and saying, "Took you nerds long enough." Immediately afterward, Earth was granted a permanent seat on the Galactic High Council. Within 24 hours, the official Galactic anthem was replaced with Danger Zone. A motion to ban orbital artillery strikes was vetoed by Earth with extreme prejudice. The HFY first annual Intergalactic beer pong tournament was announced, with Earth as the reigning champion before it even began. An emergency meeting was held to discuss the Florida situation, but no solution was found. The Dominion Council's attempt to implement reasonable military conduct laws was blocked after Earth simply refused to acknowledge them. By the time the meeting ended, most alien delegates had begun openly drinking. As for the Krogothians, they didn't just survive, they thrived. Under human influence, they abandoned their old ways of rigid, disciplined warfare and fully embraced chaotic, unrelenting insanity. Within a decade, the galaxy would recognize the Krogothian Free Republic, an ally of Earth known for spontaneously declaring wars for fun, crashing space stations into enemy fleets just to prove a point, and being the only non-human species to fully master the art of deep-fried cuisine. And at the heart of it all, standing on the bridge of his new flagship, a stolen Krogothian dreadnought with a giant "Don't Tread on Me" flag painted on the side, Colonel Jack Mitchell surveyed the stars. "This," he said, taking a deep breath, "is what victory smells like." Captain Rebecca Carter, sipping from a gas station cup labeled Extreme Caffeine Maximum Blast Edition, nodded. "So what now?" Mitchell grinned. "Now?" He turned toward the helm. "Now we find someone else to piss off." And with that, Earth's forces set course for the next great frontier. The galaxy would never know peace again.